They didn't even flinch when I dragged my suitcase through the front door. 15 years gone, and all I got was a glance. If that. My father's eyes flickered over me like I was an unexpected bill. My mother, forever polite, simply asked me to leave my bags in the laundry room. The guest room is full of Daphne's gifts, you understand. I understood. I always did. My name is Beatrice Ashby, and I was the family's invisible one. Once I was their hope, a scholarship, an athlete, the daughter who made the neighbors proud. Then I chose the Navy, and after that, I simply disappeared. To them, anyway. In this house, it's as if I never came home at all. Tonight was supposed to be about Daphne, my little sister, her engagement party. My parents had repainted the shutters, strung lanterns from the oaks, lined up trays of canapes and family silver that only came out for holidays or when someone important visited. I was invited, but I knew what that meant. Smile for the photos, keep quiet about the past. Don't linger too long in any one conversation. They sat me at the fold-out table near the kitchen, out of sight. Daphne's friends filled the main hall with laughter and the shimmer of white uniforms. My father toasted to service and tradition, and everyone clinked glasses to Daphne and her fiancé, Ethan. No one asked about my years away. No one mentioned the Navy or what it cost me. And then, just as the room buzzed with pride for Daphne, the door swung open. Major Adam Haynes, in full dress blues, strode in, straight-backed, eyes scanning the crowd. He saw me, stopped cold. The whole party seemed to freeze as he snapped to attention and said, "Ma'am, Commander Ashby." For a moment, silence swallowed everything. I watched my family's faces shift from confusion to shock. In that instant, the years I'd been erased didn't matter. The truth was finally in the room, and it had a name. Mine. There's a certain stillness that only settles in childhood homes when you return after too long, something uneasy, as if the house itself is waiting to see what you'll do next. That was how it felt the morning after Daphne's engagement party. Light spilled through the kitchen windows, dust motes floating above the old linoleum, and I could hear my mother humming softly in the pantry, stacking leftovers from last night's celebration. I lingered in the hallway, letting my fingers drift across the wallpaper, roses faded by sunlight and years. On the family wall, framed photographs lined up like medals. There was my father in his officer's uniform, my mother in scrubs beside a disaster relief tent, and, newly added, Daphne in her dress whites, face beaming with pride. My own photo, high school graduation, hair pulled back, smile too big, was missing. Gone. As if I'd never belonged on that wall at all. In this house, I was the unspoken subject. I'd left home at 24, turning down my father's offer to help with a cushy civilian job. The truth was, I'd been recruited for something no one in this town would ever read about in the local news. I spent 15 years as a shadow, missions off the record, names scrubbed from every roster, a life that didn't leave souvenirs for mantelpieces. When I stepped into the kitchen, my mother barely looked up. "There's coffee, Beatrice. Toast if you want it." "Thank you," I said, pouring myself a cup and taking a seat by the window, watching the dogwood tree sway in the breeze. My father strode in, newspaper under his arm. He gave a tight nod, half greeting, half warning. "So, how long are you planning to stay?" "Just a few days. Long enough to see Daphne settled," I replied, keeping my voice even. He grunted. "Good. Your mother's already got a lot on her plate." Daphne drifted in, hair perfectly pinned, still glowing from the night before. She flashed me a practiced smile, not quite reaching her eyes. "Ethan's parents want to do brunch tomorrow. Are you coming?" "If you want me there," I said, careful. She hesitated. "It's mostly family." "I'll make myself scarce," I said quietly, reaching for the butter dish. The silence between us was heavy, but not unfamiliar. I watched as my mother busied herself with a tray of pastries for Daphne, offering her the first one, while I was left to fend for myself. No one asked if I'd slept well. No one asked about my life, my career, or what it had cost. They didn't need to. The absence said enough. After breakfast, I carried my own cup to the sink, rinsing it quietly. As I walked back through the hallway, my gaze drifted again to the empty space on the family wall. I paused, just for a moment, letting the ache settle, then continued upstairs to the makeshift guest room. The old sewing room, now lined with boxes labeled Daphne's Wedding, Fragile. In that room, surrounded by other people's futures, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the loneliness wash over me. This was what it meant to come home, to be present but unseen, a ghost in your own story, waiting for a chance to reclaim your name. It's strange, the things you remember most when you're sitting in a silent room surrounded by someone else's dreams. For me, it was always the sound of the ocean, waves crashing in the distance, gulls circling overhead, the salt wind tangling my hair. In my mind, those memories blurred with the endless rhythm of boot camp mornings, running in the dawn mist, lungs burning, never allowed to stop. The Navy didn't break me. It remade me, bone by bone. Sometimes I wonder if my family ever truly understood why I left. Maybe they thought it was pride, or stubbornness, or a need to escape the smallness of Ashby, Georgia. But it was none of that. I'd been chosen, tapped on the shoulder after an unexpected fitness test at university, whisked away for a special opportunity. I signed papers I could never speak of. My life split in two, the world my family saw and the shadow world I could never name. For years, I sent home postcards from nondescript places. All's well, love Beatrice. Never hinting at where I'd really been. I spent birthdays in sandstorms, Christmases in airfields. My teammates became my only family, 6 of us, sworn to a code deeper than blood. I can still see their faces, even now. Elena Rivera with her quiet strength, Mei Wu's laughter in the darkest hours, Lexi's hands trembling after every mission, but always steady on the trigger when it mattered. We called ourselves ghosts, not because we wanted to disappear, but because it was the only way to survive. My last mission changed everything. I remember the stench of oil and smoke, the weight of night vision goggles digging into my skull, the cold sweat crawling down my spine as I waited for the signal. The operation was classified, even from senior command, just a rumor in the back halls of the Pentagon. We moved under the cover of darkness, infiltrating a compound where one wrong step would have erased us from the world. We succeeded, but not without cost. 2 never made it home. I wrote the letters to their families myself, hands shaking, unable to say what really happened. When the dust settled, I found myself alone. No parades, no medals, just silence. The only thing waiting for me back home was a family who didn't ask, and a small town that assumed I'd failed because I hadn't brought home a ring or a promotion. I learned to swallow it. Every slight, every whispered question, every time my mother introduced me as our other daughter, she moves around a lot. Even Daphne's friends would whisper when I visited, "Did you hear Beatrice never finished her tour? I think she works abroad, maybe a teacher?" Some mornings, I'd run the perimeter of our old neighborhood, just like I used to before sunrise. The air tasted of honeysuckle and regret. Neighbors would wave, but their eyes slid past, never really seeing me. At the grocery store, I caught snippets of conversation about Daphne's upcoming wedding and Ethan's rising star in the Navy, while my name was never mentioned. Even at church, my mother would slide down the pew, placing Daphne front and center, while I sat at the edge, invisible. I remember the day I almost left for good. I'd packed my car, ready to drive back to wherever the next contract would send me, when a package arrived. No return address, only my name in neat block letters. Inside was an old medal, the one I thought had been lost years before, and a note. "Not all ghosts are meant to disappear. E.R. Elena Rivera." Just those words kept me from running again. It was a reminder that somewhere, someone still remembered, and so I stayed. Not for them, but for myself, for the chance that maybe, one day, I could reclaim the pieces of my story that no one else had bothered to keep. Daphne's engagement party felt like a stage play where I was cast as an extra. I moved through the house, filling platters, refilling ice, keeping to the edges so my presence wouldn't upset the balance my parents had worked so hard to perfect. Laughter spilled from the living room, where Daphne and her friends, future officers, fresh in their whites, told stories about boot camp mishaps and how tough life in the service can be. My mother flitted between groups, her voice pitched just high enough to carry when she spoke about Daphne's dedication to duty and Ethan's impressive credentials. I set a tray of miniature quiches on the buffet and slipped back into the kitchen. There, I could breathe for a moment, away from the constant reminders of all the things I was not. My father entered, balancing a crystal decanter, his face set in a permanent frown of disapproval. "Try to smile, Beatrice. You're making the guests uncomfortable." I mustered a polite grin, feeling it land nowhere near my eyes. Wouldn't want to ruin Daphne's big day. The meal itself was a parade of traditions. Toasts, speeches, the passing of engraved silverware. They set me at the end of the overflow table with a few distant cousins and the pastor's wife, far enough away that my absence from the main table would be noted but never discussed. I watched as Daphne raised her glass, perfect posture, perfect smile. She spoke about the meaning of service, the honor of family, and how she hoped to live up to the Ashby name. When someone asked about me, she gave a dismissive laugh. "Oh, Beatrice. She used to be in the Navy for a while, but she didn't finish. I think she teaches English somewhere overseas now." A few polite chuckles. My face burned, but I forced myself to keep eating, steady, unblinking. My mother made the rounds with dessert, presenting Daphne with a silver cake server she'd kept for a special moment. I reached for a slice, but the plate bypassed me, offered instead to a neighbor's child. My hands returned, empty, to my lap. Then the door opened and the room shifted. Major Adam Haynes entered, his uniform immaculate, medals glinting. The conversations stilled as he strode to the center of the room, scanning faces, then stopping suddenly when his eyes landed on me. The silence was thick, expectant. He straightened and, to my utter shock, snapped a crisp salute. "Ma'am, Commander Ashby." The words hung in the air, electric. Every head turned, the laughter dying instantly. I could feel my heart pounding, my breath trapped in my chest. Daphne blinked, her smile faltering. "Commander?" she repeated, disbelief and confusion mixing in her voice. Major Haynes's gaze never left mine. "I served under Commander Ashby. Best officer I've known. The kind who doesn't need her picture on a wall to be remembered." My father's glass slipped from his hand, landing with a dull thud on the tablecloth. My mother's lips parted, unable to form words. A few guests stared, trying to piece together a story that had never been told. All I could do was nod, accepting the recognition as quietly as I'd accepted the years of being overlooked. I saw it then, the crack in Daphne's perfect composure, a flicker of jealousy or fear, I couldn't be sure. The conversation moved on, awkward and stilted, but the energy in the room had changed. Whispers rippled. For the first time, people glanced at me, not with pity or disregard, but with curiosity. I finished my meal in silence, refusing dessert, my appetite gone. The recognition felt sharp as a blade, not triumphant, just honest. Afterward, as the guests trickled out and the house fell into uneasy quiet, I slipped outside into the cool night. Alone beneath the oak trees, I let the memory of Major Haynes's salute replay in my mind. Not for pride, but for proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined the life I'd lived. For one fleeting moment, I wasn't invisible. The truth had surfaced, and with it, a tide I knew I could no longer hold back. That night, the house felt colder than usual. I lay awake in the spare room, surrounded by Daphne's wedding boxes, my mind racing. The salute from Major Haynes had stirred something in me, and, more dangerously, in my family. I could hear my parents arguing in hushed tones down the hall, their words muffled but sharp. My name, once a source of shame, now hung heavy in the air. Unable to sleep, I reached for the small battered laptop I kept tucked in my duffel. Old habits die hard. I logged into the encrypted drive, muscle memory guiding my hands as I checked the secure messages. There it was, a flagged alert. Someone had accessed a classified archive linked to one of my past operations. The breach was recent, originating from this very town. My heart pounded. I followed the digital trail, piecing together what had happened. The access had come from a university IP, Daphne's alma mater. It didn't take long to connect the dots. My sister, curious about my life, had stumbled into a web she didn't understand. Unwittingly, she'd triggered old protocols meant to keep ghosts like me buried. But it was worse than I feared. Within hours, rumors began to swirl in online forums and niche military blogs. A story about a female commander whose record was wiped, accusations of misconduct, whispers that my past missions had gone wrong. The narrative was being twisted, weaponized by someone with an agenda. I sat at the edge of the bed, the glow of the laptop reflecting in my tired eyes. This was no longer about old family wounds. If these stories spread, they could destroy not just my reputation, but the lives of those I'd served with. Names, details, sacrifices, all at risk. I shut the laptop, steadying my breath. I couldn't hide any longer. It was time to confront the truth, even if it meant exposing the shadows I'd carried alone for 15 years. I didn't wait for morning. By sunrise, I was already dressed, uniform lines sharp, eyes clearer than they'd been in years. My phone vibrated with another message, an official summons to the local base for an internal review. The words were cold, almost sterile, but the threat beneath them was real. They wanted to bury the story, to erase the evidence, and let the rumors finish what silence had started. The conference room was all harsh lights and cold coffee. Colonel Green sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, a practiced smile hiding his intentions. Beside him, a military lawyer, and 2 officers I'd never met. Observers, but not allies. I placed a small encrypted drive on the table between us, meeting Green's gaze with steady calm. "This is everything," I said quietly. "Mission logs, orders, proof of what happened and why it was covered up." He waved a hand dismissively. "Your word against command, Commander Ashby. Do you really want to relive the past?" I didn't flinch. "You're not here for the truth. You're here to keep your hands clean." The back and forth felt endless. Green tried to paint me as reckless, unstable, a liability. But I had the records. Clear, time-stamped, undeniable. The tension broke when a door opened and Daphne walked in, face pale, clutching a folder. She looked at me, then at Green, her voice wavering but determined. "I can verify the access logs. I saw everything. My sister isn't the one hiding." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, reluctantly, Green relented, nodding to the legal officer. "We'll review the evidence." I felt the weight in my chest lift. Not victory, but the relief of finally being seen. The shadows had been dragged into the light. Whatever came next, I wasn't alone anymore. Recognition arrived quietly, not with celebration, but with a simple letter. My service reinstated, my record restored. My name, once erased, was back where it belonged. Around town, people started seeing me differently. The neighbor who used to avert her gaze now greeted me with a warm hello. At church, the pastor offered a respectful handshake. Even my mother's voice softened, warmth returning as she used my name more freely. My father changed in small ways. One evening, as dusk settled, he joined me on the porch. He didn't apologize, not outright, but his words were heavy with meaning. "We never asked what you carried, Beatrice. We should have." I nodded, the silence between us finally turning gentle instead of cold. Daphne's reconciliation took longer. She'd drift near me at family gatherings, hesitant, searching for the right words. It wasn't until we sat together by the creek, where we'd played as children, that she finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Bea. I didn't want to feel invisible, so I made you disappear." I took her hand, holding it firmly. "You never had to erase me to find yourself." At the next family dinner, there was a new photograph on the wall. It showed me, not in dress blues, but in dusty fatigues, laughing beside a teammate. It wasn't posed or perfect, but it was real. No one gave a speech, but I felt it. A quiet acceptance, long overdue. As summer waned, I found a calm I'd never felt before. I understood now that my scars didn't need to fade for me to be whole. They were part of my story, proof that I'd survived what few ever saw. Sometimes it takes a lifetime for the people closest to you to truly see you. When they finally do, it's not glory that fills you, but relief. And maybe, for the first time, a sense that you finally belong, not because you've changed, but because the world finally opened its eyes.